There comes a moment in the spiritual journey when the ground beneath your feet gives way, not with the chaos of collapse, but with the eerie stillness of surrender. What once seemed urgent loses its fire. Goals that once kept you awake at night now lie dormant like old ashes. It is the paradox few speak of. The deeper you awaken, the quieter your desire becomes. The world celebrates awakening as if it were a prize, but rarely do we mention its hidden cost. When the walls of the ego dissolve, so too does the restless engine that drove you. The familiar voice that once said, "Achieve more, become more, prove yourself," grows silent. At first, this feels like peace. But then a strange hollowness creeps in, a disorientation. Without ego, where does motivation come from? This is the hidden price of awakening. The death of the false self leaves, a silence before the birth of the true one. Let us walk through this silence together and see what it has to teach. When you awaken, you are like a warrior who lays down his sword after years of battle. For so long, the clash of metal and the rush of conquest defined your heartbeat. The ego was your engine. It drove you to succeed, to stand out, to survive. It whispered, "If you do not strive, you will not matter." It painted the world as a vast arena where worth must be constantly proven, where your existence hinged upon performance. And so you ran. You became a master at building towers that reached into the clouds, all the while fearing that if you stopped for even a moment, they would collapse and bury you. But awakening is merciless in its mercy. It does not ask permission to enter your life. It dismantles the machine from the inside. The very logic that once sustained you begins to dissolve. The urgency that drove your every action starts to feel strangely hollow, like shouting into a canyon that no longer echoes back. And when the engine goes silent, it is not a gentle slowing down. It is a collapse abrupt and disorienting, as if the ground that carried you has disappeared beneath your feet. Consider Mira. For decades, she was the image of relentless success, a corporate executive whose calendar was full and whose name was spoken with admiration. Yet beneath her victories, a quiet weariness had been gathering like unseen fog. During a silent retreat, away from the noise of her world, something in her cracked open. In the hush of that inner landscape, she discovered that all the things she had been chasing carried no true weight. When she returned, she could no longer force her body to march in time with the old drumbeat. Spreadsheets blurred before her eyes. Meetings felt like shadows on a wall. To her colleagues, she seemed burned out. But in truth, she was simply awake. The egoic fuel that had once burned so brightly had turned to ash. What makes this collapse so terrifying is not merely the loss of drive. It is the loneliness of being out of sync with the world. Around you, the machinery of striving continues to roar. People are still racing, their eyes bright with the fire you once carried. You watch them as if through glass, unable to return to their rhythm. It is as though you have stepped out of time, while everyone else continues to run laps around the clock. The world mistakes your stillness for failure, and part of you begins to wonder if they are right. This is the first great trial of awakening. It feels as though your very identity is disintegrating, because for years your identity was built upon doing, upon striving, conquering, proving. When the ego falls, it does not politely hand you a new self to inhabit. It leaves you naked in the ruins of your former life, stripped of the costumes and scripts that once gave you direction. This can feel unbearable, as if you have betrayed some invisible contract with the world, as if you have become weightless in a universe that demands constant motion. Yet what appears as collapse is not death, but initiation. You are not failing, you are shedding. The drive that once pushed you was not false. It served its purpose in carrying you this far. But it was born of fear, fear of not being enough, fear of disappearing if you did not shout your existence into the world. Awakening silences that fear, and in its place there is only quiet. And because the old self cannot imagine living without its fear, it calls this quiet emptiness. It calls this stillness meaningless, but what you are experiencing is the stillness that comes before new life. Imagine a caterpillar dissolving inside its cocoon. From the outside, it appears motionless, dead. Yet within, every cell is being rearranged into something entirely new. This is the hidden work of your soul when the ego collapses. Your old ambitions melt down, and the structures of identity that once confined you soften like wax. There is nothing to cling to, and that is the point. The psyche is not punishing you. It is liberating you from the prison you did not know you were in. Most people will not understand this process. The world does not honor stillness. It rewards acceleration. It will urge you to get up, to push harder, to resurrect the old engine by sheer will. But the old engine is gone, and trying to restart it will only exhaust you further. This is why so many who awaken believe they have lost their way, when in truth they have finally stepped off the treadmill of becoming. They are not broken, they are between worlds. If you can endure this dismantling without fleeing back into busyness, you will begin to notice something subtle. Beneath the silence, something is listening. Beneath the absence of desire, something is watching. This is the first faint stirring of your true self, the one who does not run on fear or ambition, the one who has been waiting patiently beneath the noise of your striving. But it will not rise until the old machinery fully collapses, until you have tasted the strange freedom of having nothing left to prove. There is a reason this moment feels so much like death. In a way it is. It is the death of the false self, the one who believed it had to become someone in order to be worthy of love. Its passing must be mourned. You may feel grief, as though you have lost a dear companion, even though that companion was also your jailer. This grief is sacred. It is not a sign you are going backward. It is the sign you are crossing the threshold. So when you find yourself unable to move, unable to summon the old fire that once propelled you, do not panic. Do not mistake stillness for stagnation. Do not mistake the collapse of the ego for the collapse of your life. You are not losing your path. You are stepping off a path that was never truly yours. In this strange stillness, you will discover that what is dying is not your motivation but your illusion. The illusion that you were only as valuable as what you accomplished. The illusion that rest must be earned, that love must be chased, that existence must be justified. When these illusions crumble, it can feel as though the world itself has gone dim. But look closer. It is not the world that has dimmed. It is the glare of the ego's spotlight fading, allowing the softer light of your essence to come into view. This is the space before rebirth. It is vast and silent, like a sky cleared of all clouds. It may feel like nothingness, but it is not empty. It is full of everything you have yet to become. The collapse of the old engine is not the end of your journey. It is the clearing of the ground upon which your real life will finally be built. If you can trust this unraveling, if you can rest in the silence without rushing to fill it, you will see that what is falling away is not your life. It is your cage, and beyond its broken bars, the horizon is waiting. After the ego dissolves, there is a strange and haunting silence, a liminal space where all that once defined you has fallen away, and yet the new form of your being has not yet emerged. It is as though you have stepped out of the known world and into a vast white field where nothing grows and nothing moves. It feels cold, still, and endless, like the winter between autumn's death and spring's bloom. This is not depression, though it may mimic its shadows. It is the natural void after disidentification, the space where the scaffolding of the old self has been dismantled and the architecture of the new self is still only a whisper. Most who arrive here are unprepared. The ego, for all its burdens, gave the illusion of solidity. It was a mask, but it was a familiar one. Without it, the psyche floats untethered, unsure of what it belongs to. Many seekers panic at this stage. They rush to resurrect the old identity, to resurrect any identity, because the emptiness feels unbearable. The mind screams that something has gone wrong, that they are slipping into nothingness. But nothing has gone wrong. This emptiness is sacred. It is the space between lives, the stillness in which the soul waits to hear its own voice without interference. Consider the snake shedding its skin. In the in-between, its vision clouds, its old covering splits and peels away. It becomes slow, vulnerable, almost blind. It cannot return to the old skin, and it cannot yet move freely in the new. It must endure that suspended state, trusting that something vital is happening in the stillness. So it is with the soul. You are no longer who you were, yet not fully who you are becoming. All the old instincts to strive, to achieve, to prove yourself, now ring hollow, and yet the new song of your being has not yet begun. This stage demands radical patience, the kind our modern world rarely understands. The world worships movement, noise, and certainty. It despises the unknown. It will tell you to get back on track, as if you had merely stumbled. But you are not off track. You are in the womb of transformation, where nothing visible is happening, and yet everything is quietly rearranging itself in the unseen depths. It is like standing at the bottom of a still lake, while the surface world goes on above you, oblivious to the silent metamorphosis occurring below. The psyche uses this emptiness to loosen what no longer belongs to you. Old desires dissolve like mist. Ambitions you once clung to now feel strangely foreign, as though they belonged to someone else entirely. Even memory begins to shift. Stories you told about who you are lose their power. This disorientation can be terrifying, because the ego believed those stories were your essence. But they were only costumes. Now the stage is bare. The old play has ended, and the curtain has not yet risen on the next. If you can stay with the silence instead of fleeing it, you will notice something subtle, a soft hum beneath the stillness, like the first tremor of life stirring underground while winter still holds the earth. At first it is barely perceptible. It will not demand your attention the way the ego once did. It will not shout, it will wait. It is the voice of your essence, ancient and patient, emerging from beneath the ruins. But it will not come while you are busy rebuilding the old structures. It will only appear if you allow the void to remain a void. Many fear this emptiness because it mirrors death. In truth, it is a kind of death, the death of the identity you constructed to survive. Death is never comfortable. It strips away the familiar, it severs attachments, it silences the noise that made you feel real, and yet all true rebirths require this descent into nothingness. Even nature knows this. Seeds must be buried in darkness before they sprout. Stars are born from the collapse of dying ones. Life does not emerge from clinging to what has been. It emerges from the fertile stillness that follows its dissolution. This is why trying to skip over this stage only deepens the suffering. If you try to force your way back into productivity or purpose too quickly, you will find your energy strangely hollow. You may wear the mask of your former self, but it will no longer fit, and the strain of pretending will exhaust you. The psyche cannot be rushed. It blooms in its own time, like spring, emerging only when the cold has truly loosened its grip. It can help to remember that this emptiness is not a punishment. It is a purification. It is the soul's way of emptying the vessel of everything false, so that what is true can find space to enter. Imagine trying to fill a cup that is already brimming with stagnant water. You must first pour it out. That is what the psyche is doing now. It is pouring out all that was borrowed, inherited, performed, or forced. It is making room for what is real. During this time, the simplest acts can anchor you. Walking slowly through nature, sitting in quiet rooms, breathing deeply without agenda. These become sacred rituals. They remind you that even though your identity feels dissolved, life still moves through you. The sun still rises, the heart still beats, the earth still turns. These rhythms continue not because you strive, but because you are. Slowly, you begin to trust that being is enough, even if you have no idea yet who you are becoming. And when the mind insists on clarity, when it demands to know what comes next, you can gently remind it that winter never explains itself while it is still snowing. The buds do not announce their arrival, they simply bloom when the time is right. The same will be true of you. Something new will stir from within, not from fear, but from love. Not from the desperate hunger to prove your worth, but from the quiet knowing that you have worth simply because you exist. This emptiness is not the end of your story. It is the sacred pause between chapters, the deep breath the soul takes before speaking in its true voice for the first time. And though it feels like nothingness now, one day you will look back and see it for what it truly was, the cradle in which your real life began to awaken. When the old egoic drive dies, there is at first an eerie stillness, as though the inner machinery that once roared has been dismantled and scattered to the wind. All the compulsions that once whipped you forward, status, security, admiration, conquest, suddenly feel weightless, stripped of their former urgency. At first this feels like loss, as though your will itself has withered. The world around you continues its frantic chase, while you stand strangely still, unable to care about the trophies you once pursued. It is easy to believe you have become hollow, emptied of passion, drifting without purpose. But in truth, you are not dying. You are clearing space for something sacred to awaken. The old drive was forged in the fires of fear. It was born from the quiet terror of not being enough, from the belief that if you ceased striving, you would disappear into insignificance. That fear had sharp teeth. It pushed you to achieve, to outshine, to keep climbing even when your spirit was collapsing under the weight. But when awakening shatters the ego, that fear loses its hold. And without fear, the engine that once drove you stalls. This feels at first like a kind of death. Yet beneath the ashes of that collapse, something new begins to stir, fragile as a candle flame, yet impossibly steady. I once knew a man who embodied this transformation. For decades he was a high-earning lawyer, draped in the prestige of his profession. His life was measured in billable hours and accolades, and from the outside he appeared complete. But inside, something was quietly unraveling. He described it as a slow, invisible erosion of meaning. He would wake before dawn to prepare for court, only to stare at his reflection and feel like a stranger. Then, almost without warning, the machinery stopped. He could no longer summon the energy to chase numbers or win cases. Panic gripped him. He thought he had lost his ambition, that he was fading. Months passed in this disoriented fog. And then, on a whim, he visited a youth shelter. It was meant to be temporary, a gesture, not a commitment. But the first time he sat on the floor with those children, listening to their stories, something in him cracked open. There was no applause there, no prestige, no ladder to climb. Yet for the first time in years, he felt the unmistakable current of life flowing through him. He returned the next day and the next, not because he was trying to achieve anything, but because something deeper than choice was drawing him. He called it grace. What had seemed like the death of ambition had simply been its transformation. This is the secret few speak of. Motivation does not vanish when the ego dissolves. It simply changes its source. It no longer screams, it whispers. It stops asking, "What can I do to prove my worth?" and begins to ask, "What longs to be born through me?" The old drive was outward, built on comparison and scarcity, always measuring itself against others. The new drive is inward, born from abundance, anchored in meaning. It does not compete, it creates. It does not chase recognition. It becomes an expression of the soul's hidden longing to give. At first, this new motivation can feel confusing, even suspicious. It moves differently. The ego's drive is like fire, hot, consuming, impatient. The soul's drive is like a river, quiet, persistent, carving its way through stone not by force but by devotion. The ego surges in bursts, demanding results. The soul seeps in slowly, asking only for your surrender. This is why so many mistake its subtlety for absence. They expect passion to roar, not realizing that true passion glows. It is not frantic, it is steady. When this shift begins, you may notice small things first. The projects you once pursued for recognition now feel heavy, while the things that bring no external reward, writing late into the night, planting a garden, comforting a friend, begin to shimmer with meaning. The outer world might see these things as trivial, but to you they carry the unmistakable taste of truth. You start to see how much of your old ambition was not truly yours at all. It was borrowed from culture, inherited from fear, absorbed from the hunger of others. The soul is not interested in such hunger. It seeks only what is real. There will be a temptation to translate this new inner current back into the old language of achievement, to ask, "How can I turn this calling into success?" But doing so too quickly can crush it. The soul's calling is delicate when it first emerges. It does not want to be monetized or measured. It wants to be nurtured. It must be tended like a spark in the dark, shielded from the winds of expectation until it grows strong enough to burn on its own. This transition is not about abandoning the world or renouncing responsibility. It is about shifting the center from which you live. The ego lives to acquire, the soul lives to express. The ego asks what it can take from life, the soul asks what it can give to life. When you move from egoic drive to inner calling, your actions may outwardly look similar. You may still build, create, lead, but the energy behind them is transformed. They are no longer fueled by fear of being nothing. They are fueled by love of being something true. In time, the new drive begins to feel less like effort and more like obedience to something sacred within you. It no longer matters whether anyone applauds. The river does not ask for applause as it flows to the sea. It flows because that is its nature. This is how the soul moves once it awakens. You begin to realize that your worth is not tied to outcomes, and so you are free to create without anxiety. Paradoxically, this often leads to deeper impact than the ego ever achieved, because your work now carries the resonance of authenticity. People can feel it, even if they cannot name it. What begins as a whisper eventually becomes your heartbeat. The things that once felt like chores now become offerings. Time no longer feels like something to conquer, but something to inhabit fully. And though you may no longer burn with the frantic energy that once propelled you, you will discover something far more enduring, a quiet fire that does not flicker, no matter how dark the world becomes. It does not consume you, it sustains you. The shift from external drive to inner calling is not a loss of ambition. It is the revelation of your true ambition, the one buried beneath fear all along. It is not the ambition to be seen, but the longing to become what you were always meant to be. It is the moment when the question is no longer, "How can I prove my worth?" but How can I serve what is sacred within me? And once you taste that question, once you let it take root in the emptied soil of your soul, nothing else will ever satisfy you again. There is a moment, often unspoken yet profoundly felt, when one awakens to the quiet truth that they no longer belong to the world they once called home. The patterns that once shaped their days, the competitions, the applause, the endless striving to fit the molds handed down by others, begin to crumble like ancient stone in their hands. Where once they moved in rhythm with the collective heartbeat of ambition, they now find themselves walking to a rhythm that no one else seems to hear. It is in this strange silence that the first tremors of loneliness arrive, not as enemies but as heralds of transformation. For what has died is not merely a lifestyle or set of habits, but the old identity itself, the self that existed for approval, that lived on the oxygen of recognition, and that defined its worth in comparison to others. Those around you will notice the shift before they can understand it. They will look at your life as though you have abandoned the script mid-performance. Friends who once admired your drive may now whisper that you have lost your edge. Family who once celebrated your achievements may frown, saying that you have changed, their words carrying both concern and disapproval, and they are not wrong. You have changed, but not in the way they think. What they see as loss is, in truth, the shedding of illusion. They are grieving the version of you that lived to satisfy their expectations, not realizing that version was never entirely real. This is why their discomfort cuts so deeply. It reminds you of how much of your life was spent performing rather than living. In this phase, conversations that once felt nourishing can suddenly feel hollow, like echoes in an abandoned hall. Small talk about careers, possessions, or victories can stir a subtle ache because you now see the invisible hunger beneath it, the need to prove, to accumulate, to appear successful. What once energized you now leaves you strangely weary, as if you are standing on the outside of a carnival, watching the glitter and the noise without any desire to step inside. You are no longer compelled by the same rewards, and thus you begin to drift, almost imperceptibly, away from the current of the world. This drifting is disorienting. It is the soul's way of pulling you back to its own gravity. There is a deep loneliness in this liminal space, a loneliness that is not about the absence of people, but about the absence of resonance. You may be surrounded by familiar faces, and yet feel as if you are speaking a language no one else understands. This is because much of society bonds through shared striving, through a tacit agreement to pursue external validation together. When you step out of that chase, you break an unspoken pact, and the distance between you and others becomes undeniable. This can feel like exile. It can feel as though you have been cast out from a kingdom you once ruled, wandering now through a vast inner wilderness without map or compass. But here is the paradox. This loneliness is not a punishment. It is a birth canal. It is the sacred emptiness that appears when the false self dissolves and the true self has not yet fully emerged. In the silence of being misunderstood, you begin to hear your own voice again, thin at first, then clearer, then steady as the toll of a bell in the distance. What once felt like isolation slowly reveals itself as spaciousness, and in that space something extraordinary begins, the rebuilding of your life not on the scaffolding of expectation, but on the foundation of essence. This process cannot be rushed because it is not mechanical, it is organic, like a seed pushing through the dark soil toward the sun. The loneliness is the soil. It is rich with the remnants of all you once were, and it must hold you in its darkness until your roots are strong enough to bear the light. Many try to escape this stage. They rush back to the noise, the applause, the comfortable cages of belonging, just to feel the warmth of acceptance again. But each time they do, something inside them withers. The soul cannot thrive on borrowed meaning. It waits patiently, even painfully, for the moment when you will choose truth over approval. And when you do, when you stop trying to prove your worth to those who cannot yet see it, you will notice something subtle yet profound. The loneliness begins to shift. It becomes less like exile and more like sanctuary. The solitude that once felt suffocating begins to breathe with you like a quiet companion. You may find yourself savoring silence, walking through nature as if through a cathedral, or sitting alone in your room and feeling a presence that is entirely your own. This is not the cold emptiness of abandonment. It is the warm emptiness of freedom. It is the space where your soul can stretch, where it can speak in its own forgotten tongue. In time, new connections will come, not forced, not hunted for, but drawn like moths to the flame of your authenticity. These will not be relationships built on mutual status or shared striving. They will be formed in the stillness, in the honest places where masks are unnecessary. Such people may be few, but with them you will not feel the need to perform. You will simply be, and that simple being will feel more intimate than years of crowded friendships built on pretending. It is a strange and humbling miracle. When you no longer need to fit in, you begin to find where you truly belong. What once felt like the death of your social world reveals itself as the birth of your inner one. The loneliness was never a void, it was a womb. It was not the world rejecting you, but the soul reclaiming you. And as you walk this quieter path, you will notice a gentler kind of companionship. Not always people, sometimes just the subtle hum of life itself, reminding you that you are not alone, only becoming whole. The world you once belonged to may not recognize you anymore, but you will recognize yourself at last. And in that recognition, the longing to be understood by others will soften, replaced by the deeper fulfillment of understanding yourself. This is the sacred irony. The moment you no longer fit in is the moment you begin to fit within. There comes a moment, often after the long unraveling of the ego, when a curious stillness enters the soul. The frantic pulse of what must I achieve, who must I become to be worthy, fades into the background like a distant echo, and in that quiet, something entirely new begins to move, not a striving, not a hunger, but a subtle current flowing from a deeper well. It does not clamor for recognition or compete for position. It simply calls you to serve. This is the strange paradox of awakening. Once the self has been emptied of its need to matter, it becomes the clearest vessel for something that truly matters. For so long, the ego convinces us that purpose is born from conquest. It whispers that we must climb the highest peak, claim the rarest prize, prove our brilliance by standing taller than others. Yet this purpose is brittle. It shatters the moment applause fades, the moment someone else outshines us, the moment the world turns its gaze elsewhere. It is a purpose built on sand, and when it collapses, as it inevitably does, many are left adrift, believing they have lost their drive. But they have not lost it. They have simply been emptied so that a truer calling can emerge, one that is not rooted in the fear of insignificance, but in the joy of offering what is real within them. This new current feels different from ambition. It does not burn with the fever of urgency. It hums with the quiet insistence of life itself. It is not about making yourself special, but about allowing something sacred to move through you. The artist paints not to be celebrated, but because beauty longs to take form through their hands. The healer lays their palms on another's wounds not to be admired, but because compassion courses through them like blood. The teacher speaks not to be followed, but because truth seeks a voice. Such acts are no longer transactions for approval. They are offerings. And in that offering, the soul tastes a kind of freedom the ego could never comprehend. When the ego dies, it takes with it the anxious hunger for significance. It takes the endless self, measuring, the constant internal scoreboard, the gnawing fear that you are never enough. What rises in its place is something quieter, yet infinitely stronger, a love that seeks only to give. It is not sentimental love, not the fragile affection that depends on being loved back, but the fierce, unconditioned love of life itself, moving through you as naturally as the wind moves through the trees. This is where true power lives, not in the noisy striving of I must, but in the serene certainty of I am. It is power without aggression, influence without control, impact without ego. Such purpose cannot be manufactured. It can only be revealed, and only after the ego's scaffolding has crumbled. Often it emerges in moments that seem small from the outside, but are seismic within. A man who once chased wealth finds unexpected joy in mentoring children, realizing he is not filling them with his wisdom, but simply bearing witness to the light already within them. A woman who once performed for admiration begins tending a community garden, her hands in the soil not to be seen, but to quietly serve the renewal of life. These are not grand gestures in the eyes of the world, yet they carry a depth that reverberates far beyond what ambition alone could ever reach. This is because true purpose is not a goal to be hunted down, it is a gift to be received. And it comes only when the mind grows still enough, the heart open enough for something larger to enter. It does not ask, how will this make me important? It asks, what wants to be born through me, even if no one ever knows my name? Such a question is terrifying to the ego, because it cannot be answered with control. But to the soul, it is liberation. It frees you from the exhausting task of proving your worth. It frees you from the lie that your value depends on achievement. It frees you at last to be a channel rather than a performer. And here lies the deepest irony. The very moment you stop trying to be powerful, you become a force. For power that is rooted in ego must be defended, maintained, constantly displayed. But power that is rooted in love needs no defense. It simply radiates. It is the quiet presence that steadies others without words. It is the unassuming act that ripples through lives unseen. It is the invisible thread that binds the human story together. Those who serve in this way often go unnoticed by history's spotlight. Yet they are the hidden architects of the world's renewal. They are the unseen roots from which all lasting beauty grows. To live in this way requires surrender, a surrender not of your will, but of your need to control the outcome. It is to act not because you must succeed, but because you cannot not act. It is to give yourself to what is meaningful even when it may never be measured, applauded, or rewarded. This is why it feels like devotion more than motivation. Motivation pushes, devotion flows. Motivation is fueled by fear of failure. Devotion is sustained by love of the thing itself. And when you are devoted, failure loses its power to wound you, because your worth is no longer on trial. You are not striving to earn your place. You are simply expressing the life that is already within you. There will still be challenges, of course. The world will not always understand this quieter way of being. Some will misread your calm as laziness, your humility as lack of ambition. They will try to lure you back into the old games of proving and competing. But once you have tasted this deeper current, the old games lose their hold. The applause that once thrilled you becomes faint. The comparisons that once haunted you dissolve. You no longer need to outshine anyone because you are no longer standing on the same stage. You are rooted now not in performance but in presence. And in that presence you become something rare, a human being who is not trying to be anything else. This is what makes your work luminous. This is what allows your presence to heal without effort, to inspire without trying, to change the atmosphere of a room simply by being fully there. The ego strives to build monuments. The soul quietly tends to life. And though the monuments may crumble, life endures. In the end, this is the secret the ego can never grasp. The more you release your need to matter, the more you begin to matter in ways you cannot measure. For when you live as a vessel for something greater than yourself, your impact is no longer confined to what can be seen. It ripples outward in unseen ways, like the roots of a tree nourishing the soil long after the tree has fallen. You may not be remembered by name, yet the essence of what moved through you will live on in countless unseen forms. That is the quiet eternity of true purpose. It is not earned, it is not claimed, it is simply lived. So if you find yourself awakening and wondering why the fire that once drove you has gone out, know this: it is not the end of your journey, it is the threshold. The ego was only the first engine. Its death is not your downfall, it is your initiation. Let the silence teach you, let the emptiness cleanse you, let the new voice, soft and steady, rise from the depths. You have not lost your motivation, you have simply outgrown the kind the world rewards. And when you emerge from this passage, you will not burn with frantic ambition, you will shine with quiet purpose, and that light, though it makes no noise, will illuminate everything it touches.